that was the first thing I would do actually every day, is I'd kind of be there with the medic. That was, was the first point of call. And they'd be getting new masks as well, because there were production specified respirator masks each day as well, because they were the most effective in terms of protection. So I was handing those out and getting people to do their temperature test, giving them their color-coded wristbands, and it was a daily thing as well. That's what started the day for all the set days and also all the shoot days.
First thing I want to say to all of you is welcome, and welcome to the amazing panel. We brought here today the members of the team who created and shot Pirates. Got Polly Lees, who's a producer, one of the producers, two producers. We've got Kate Norrish, who's a producer. We've got Jaron, and he's the first AD. And we've got Roxy, who was the COVID supervisor on the shoot. I also want to introduce John Maidens, who's going to be chairing this session, and I'm going to hand over to him and also ask him to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the session. I hope you can all see and hear us all clearly. As Emma introduced us all, I'm John. I'm a director myself, mainly in television, hopefully film one day, and that's me. And because I'm deaf, Teresa is my interpreter, so you can see her in vision. She's basically relaying what other people are saying for my benefit. But thank you. Let's kick off, shall we, without any further ado. We'll go to Kate, please. Good afternoon, Kate. Would you mind kicking off by telling us about Pirates and what it's about, please?
Yeah, it's the debut feature of writer-director Reggie Yates, who a lot of people might know from his documentaries on TV. And it's what he has dubbed the shortest road movie in history. It takes place on New Year's Eve 1999, and it follows three boys who are all best mates, who are all trying to break into pirate radio, who are endeavouring to traverse London from north to south to get into the hottest New Year's Eve UK garage party. And it's all of the kind of events along the way that conspire against them getting into the party. It's a comedy.
Awesome. And was it a big crew in addition to the cast? How many people were involved altogether?
It's three main leads in the cast and a supporting cast of around 7 others, I guess. The crew size was, I think, probably about 70. This isn't a low budget film. This is categorized as a low budget film, but it's not super low. It was financed by BBC Films and the BFI. And we were very happily working our way through 8 weeks of prep in January and what was to be a 5-week shoot from February into March. March into April even.
Yes, and of course we all know what happened in March. Can you tell us roughly when that kicked in relation to your shoot?
Yeah, I mean, it literally kicked in over the course of one weekend, I think was how we would categorise it. We discussed COVID in January when we got our insurance policy as a bit of a kind of, is this going to affect us? Probably not, but maybe we should sort of hope we're covered. I'll never come here, which I think what everyone thought. And then the kind of, it got closer and closer. And then one Friday in March, we were shooting, and it was clearly, this was early March. This was around I would say this is about the 13th of March. Might have been Friday the 13th. Can't remember if it was exactly that date, and it was clearly upon us. And so we sent out a missive to our crew about hand washing, about being careful, about if you had symptoms to talk to your HOD, just to kind of try to be ahead of the game. And I remember very clearly at the end of that night, we were shooting nights, a lot of the crew, people still thought this was just quite distant and were kind of coughing and saying, oh, maybe I need to go home. And there was just a bit of joking about it, which was kind of understandable because even then it didn't feel that bad. But I would say within the course of 3 more days, so by Monday night when we were shooting, we came back to shoot and it suddenly felt much more serious. This was Monday the 16th, so the week before we went into lockdown. And suddenly everyone set was taking it much more seriously. There was a lot of concern from people that had elderly relatives or people with comorbidities and things, there was concern about it. Jeroen did a briefing on set. It suddenly just felt like it was upon us in a way that we hadn't anticipated. and we had 10 people self-isolating by that stage, which for a crew of 70 was significant. And by the end of that night, we had come to the conclusion that we had to shut down, that we couldn't continue safely.
Yeah, and I remember as well that the day before we locked down, that was originally a shoot day, but that became like a recce day because we had to basically postpone that day because of COVID-related issues.
But I imagine, I mean, back then, we didn't really know what coronavirus was. You must have been in the dark, basically.
We were in the dark. What we were doing was looking at the government's website and reading as much information as possible. But we were absolutely in the dark. And I think we shut down a week before the lockdown happened, simply because we had so many people self-isolating. It was actually, Polly and I felt it was dangerous on set. And it also felt, not only did we have people missing from set, it felt like there was this background buzz of fear in people's heads. It was like people were trying to focus on their jobs, and, you know, working on a crew is dangerous. There's kit, there's lights, there's all kinds of stuff going on. You're on location, there are roads. And yet it felt like in the back of everyone's heads was this concern and fear that was just getting bigger and bigger. And it just didn't feel safe for us to continue, which is why we took the decision to shut down before lockdown happened.
We actually, on that last night, there was an accident. Somebody, totally non-corona related, somebody tripped right at the end. We were filming nights for most of the shoot because it was set on Millennium New Year's Eve, which also meant that we were all in a slightly separate bubble from the rest of the world. But on that last night, there was an accident, and we had a medic on set, and the medic thought the person should go to hospital. We couldn't get an ambulance. No ambulance was coming out for anything like a fall. There were very few senior people on set because they were self-isolating. So we did take the person. I took the person to A&E, and we sat there, and she was thankfully fine. But it was all contributing towards feeling that Kate and I, and plus, as Kate said, the sort of the anxiety, the mental health of everybody, it was really, really quite unpleasant. So we, I think there was a recce that took place on the Monday, but Kate and I spent most of the day just on the phone sorting it out.
I think for Polly and I, it was the hardest decision of our professional careers to shut a film down when we had 10 shoot days left. You know, we thought we would make it through. This was Reggie's debut. We were having a lovely time. Everyone was really enjoying it. We were getting great stuff. It was the 3 young actors. It was their feature debuts. This is a big break for them. But it just, and at that stage when we shut down, we had no idea whether we'd be able to come back. We didn't know what world we were headed into.
So when you made that decision to shut down, like you say, you had no idea whether you could resume or not. You know, over how long a period of time did you manage to work out that you perhaps could resume, and how different that might look?
I think in the first instance, it was, we knew we were covered by our insurance, but we didn't know when they would pay out or how much they would pay out. BFI and BBC were very supportive of our decision. And I think probably within a week or so, I mean, we spent a lot of time shutting the film down, which was tricky and took more work than any of us expected. And then it was a question of how determined are we to come back? And I think Polly would agree, everyone felt very determined that we would come back.
Yeah, there was always a will to come back, and I think the financiers were always really supportive of it. So we always sort of thought we would be coming back. I don't think, in fairness, I don't think any of us quite realised that the world would still be in, you know, we'd be having this chat with you in November and we'd still be in lockdown. I think we thought it was a way to go, and then the corona would be sorted and then we'd all be back working normally. But so yeah, but we began to, I think round about end of May, we began to, I think protocols were being pulled together and we began to realise, okay, there is a potential for coming back.
Yeah, because I remember making a first new schedule in May somewhere, just to see where we're at and how we could do this.
So yeah, I think until then, we, as Kate said, we were shutting the film down. It took a lot of work, and then it's as much work shutting a film down as it is starting one up. And then, and by the end of May, I think the protocols that were being pulled together by the whole production community were really helpful. And I think everyone began to, and I think our crew were fantastic. We stayed constantly in contact with them, with the HODs. We had regular Zoom meetings, just firstly to check in with everybody, because I think we were all in shock at first, and then those conversations began to be a bit more practical. And then Dylan, who's meant to be on this, but unfortunately hasn't been able to make it, Dylan Reese, our line producer, started to talk about formalizing that and bringing together our own protocols. And I think that was done round about June time. We began to put our own protocols together.
And in the meantime as well, in terms of shutting things down, one of the other things that we felt was really important was to furlough as many of all of the crew that were on payroll that we could, to support people, because obviously it was like the rug was pulled out from underneath everybody. And it felt, I felt most keenly my responsibility as a producer, I think more than I ever have, to a kind of working community and trying to support them. And the government kept changing the advice almost day by day. So it'd be one day I'd be saying to people, yes, you can go on it. No, you can't go on it. You might be able to go on it. But I mean, eventually we got as many people as we could furloughed, which I think also helped in terms of keeping us feeling together as a crew and constantly communicating.
So you're talking about the end of May, early June time, when you were kind of seriously gearing up to resuming filming. You must have felt like guinea pigs, really, in terms of the filming community at large. You know, you were testing the waters, as it were.
Somebody said to us, I think one of our financiers said, we're like the canary down the coal mine, which didn't feel that great, actually, when they said it. I'd say gearing up gives it a little bit more momentum than it felt at the time. I think we were optimistic we would be back filming. Kate always said, if we get this in the can by the end of the year, we'll have done a remarkable thing. It would be great. So we were thinking quite long term, but we were definitely beginning to pull stuff together.
Wow. And so, Yaron, I mean, in terms of resuming the filming and doing the schedules again, what were your kind of challenges really around that?
Yeah, so the first conversations that we had is like, how are we able to resume, and what should we do to limit the risks in terms of logistics in the first place. And of course we're all going to be wearing masks and sanitizing our hands, etc. But what could we do from a schedule point of view to limit the risks? So we built in some time to allow for COVID cleaning of equipment, and we made sure that we didn't need to unit move during the day, because that was sort of the first thing that we addressed making a new schedule, is that we eliminate all the unit moves that we had, because most of the scene we had left was on the road, and therefore a lot of stuff was like shooting in this street and then a bit in this street, and for some days we had like a unit move in between, and we said, okay, let's eliminate those, so we just stay in one place. We don't have to like pick up 50 people and move them elsewhere, because how are we going to do that during COVID? We didn't know, like we can't all travel in the same bus together. So that was one thing, and that extended our days significantly. So we went from having 9 to 10 days left to eventually 16 days, with one splinter day at the end, a 17 splinter day. So that was immediately extended our shoot. It felt like we did a whole second film, basically. Like we were joking about doing the sequel.
We did. We shot 15 days the first time around and 16 days the second. So, yeah. Or 16 plus the splinter, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a really important point, because whichever way you can shoot a film under COVID conditions, it takes longer. Yeah. There's so many things. Yeah. Can you talk us through about how those extended filming days and how the page count per day went down, as it were?
So, like on a normal low budget film, you'd expect to shoot 4.5, 5 pages a day, on average. Just take that as a ballpark figure. On this, we sort of were aiming for 3 pages a day. I think we were just made like a little calculation last night just to make sure telling you guys any bullshit. But we basically achieved like 3 pages a day with the COVID measures in place. I mean, at certain points you are able to shoot as fast as on a normal shoot, because if you're in one place and everything is geared up, it's just moving the camera around. But anyone who says that it goes as fast as a normal shoot, that's not entirely true, because you always have to take distancing into account. There's signing in, like this temperature checking. There's on certain days we had about 10 members of the crew being tested every week. So there's various things that come into play that affect the schedule and affect how you do things on a daily basis.
Well, it's a good junction to bring in Roxanne, if I may, the COVID supervisor. So being brought into this film for the second half of the shoot, as it were, what was your job really, in terms of what was your area of responsibility? What did you have to do?
Okay, yeah. So it was great at the very beginning. It was the production team were great. Polly and Kate and Dylan and the production manager were great, because they were kind of like, look, this is the first time for any of us. This is kind of, we don't know what we're doing. Let's just work together and we'll get through it. So there was an element of kind of taking on what they'd already developed, because they already did a huge amount, as Kate mentioned, with the protocols in place, and they worked with all the HODs to do HOD specific protocols, as well as department specific protocols instead of just general ones. So all of that had already been developed into a very, very specific document, which was great. So I was kind of using that as a sort of jumping off point and liaising in the pre-production stage. I did 2 weeks of pre-production with them. So we were kind of remotely, I was liaising with all the HODs and the production team constantly about all of those things and how this would work in practice and what my role would be on set, and also managing the testing, because testing actually became a huge job, much bigger than I expected as a coordination part of my role. So it was very much that I was using their protocols as a jumping off point, liaising with everyone, making sure everyone knew what they had to do, what they had to tell their teams to do. And I was across everyone and everything. And then kind of thinking about what my role on set would be, which was more TBC, especially because you're working remotely. You're not kind of able just to go to all these recce's and have team meetings the way you would normally during prep. So yeah, and then I kind of quickly decided I was going to be an actor bodyguard. That's what I decided in the first instance. I was kind of like, as long as I can kind of be very aware about what's happening to the actors when they're not protected as the others are. They have to not wear masks during their performances. They have to move around between places and near to crew sometimes. So I kind of use that as a kind of a central part of my job, and making sure they're okay and keep an eye on them, and then everything else kind of keep an eye on as well, which is tough because you can't be everywhere at once. But kind of that was what I used as my basis, if that makes sense.
So just to help for those who perhaps haven't been on a COVID friendly shoot, can you kind of just bullet point, if you like, what exactly the rules were on the set? What did you have to observe and make sure happened at all times? Yeah.
So the first thing was masks. So even though this was a almost entirely exterior outdoor shoot, there were some internals, and there was some locations and some studio shooting as well. But the production made it a rule that everyone had to wear them all times in terms of the crew, and that includes outside. And not everyone will kind of get that, generally as a rule. But actually, I think it was the right thing to do, because you can on a production, you can't constantly be separated to the distance that you would like. It's just not possible with certain parts of production and certain roles between crew members and departments. So mask was an absolute essential at all times for crew, apart from when eating and whatnot. Obviously you'd have to sort of stand apart for that. The second thing was distancing as much as possible. As I say, 2 meters is pretty impossible some of the time for film production, just because of the way that departments have to work together. But departmental separation was something we really tried to push as much as possible. And again, the things that the production team had organized and things that the AD team had organized made that easier in terms of nice big open spaces where people could be, have their own little section for their department and their kit, and they didn't have to all be bunched together. So all of that was kind of was thought about and when it came to kind of deciding on things like unit bases and locations as well, which is great throughout pre-production. So there was that, and then also the sort of cleaning and hand sanitizing thing was a part of it as well. Everyone had their little individual sort of sanitizer bottles that could be refilled by bigger ones, and of course they went missing, and we probably technically 3 per person by the end, but God knows where they went. But everyone had their individual ones, and the element of cleaning as well, they were constantly having it sort of drummed in as well between departments, because they were very good with themselves, but also whenever I could be involved, it was the kind of, okay, you have to pass that one thing to someone else from a different department, have to be rigorous with the cleaning of that item, the cleaning of hands before and after, very, very rigid with that. And especially with the cast as well, there was a lot of discussion with the art department and prop standby about how cast members were able to touch things that crew members were touching and all of that. So that was a big kind of ongoing thing while shooting as well. And then the other side of it was something called the close contact cohort that the production team had introduced and put into their protocols, which was the concept of a sort of a central team, kind of the cast and the people who were close to the cast. So the director, the DOP, and the first AD Jeroen. That was kind of the close contact cohort, because they have to be in close proximity with each other a lot of the time, and with the cast when they're not wearing masks. And again, the crew members in that, they still had to wear masks and distance with the cast as much as possible. But it was just about having as many of those kind of protocols in place for that particular team around the cast. And that team and the cast were also the ones who were tested as well, along with other people that we decided upon kind of on a weekly basis as well, depending on what was going on.
The other thing we did, like every morning, if you were going on to set, you had a questionnaire to fill in, and when you arrived, you had to go to the medic's tent, have your temperature taken, given a band, different colour band every day, which Roxy organised for you to be on set. And then also on top of that was an app for ordering food. So there weren't huge queues around the food trucks. There'd be one person from each department. So you'd order your food on an app, and then one person from each department would collect the food for each department and would take it to them, and they'd eat separately. So that was also another just practical thing. And there was no video village. The other thing is we all had apps so that we could get live rushes on our iPads and phones.
Yeah, exactly. There was that element. And especially when we did the studio days, which is the first 3 days of the shoot, and we had a lot of space inside around the set build, we had this sort of system in place, the kind of color-coded system as to who was the close contact cohort, where they could be on set, who could be on set temporarily because they have to for their job, and who was never allowed near set. It was all kind of laid out on the floor, and people had colored wristbands to link to that as well. So, but yeah, as Kate said, the temperature checking, that was the first thing I would do actually every day, is I kind of be there with the medic. That was, was the first point of call, and they'd be getting new masks as well, because there were production specified respirator masks each day as well, because they were the most effective in terms of protection. So I was handing those out and getting people to do their temperature test, giving them their color-coded wristbands, and it was a daily thing as well. That's what started the day for all the set days and also all the shoot days.
We were also very, very clear that we would have no set visits. So there were no press visits. There was no finances coming down. There was no anything. We were very clear as to who was coming down to the set each day. In fact, Kate and I would normally dovetail and spend a bit of time on set each day. We didn't see each other for the whole shoot because we were covering different days. In fact, everyone else saw Kate a lot more than I did, and vice versa. But it's just what we had to do. Somehow we got through it. And
that clarity helped us a lot to move forward. Just knowing that who's going to be on set, who's occasionally allowed to come in and out, and who's not allowed to come on set, that really helped us moving forward, and in certain situations helped us moving faster as well.
Yeah, from my perspective as well, I was liaising closely with the production coordinator about the unit list and the call sheet for the following day, so that I would make sure I know who's coming in. Sometimes someone knew about someone else, it was an addition, so I would also be on top of that completely as to who to expect to be on set or location that day.
Yeah.
And I think Roxy was brilliant for us in terms of, everyone has different attitudes to risk on a set. Some people, some people just are prepared to take more risk than others, but Polly and I and Roxy and the team were determined that we would set a base standard. Like, I don't care what your personal attitude to risk is, this is the production's attitude, and we're not taking any risk. We will mitigate risk as far as possible. So you have to abide by these rules. And that was sort of emailed to everyone before they came on set, and everyone had to do the screen skills COVID course to come on set. You weren't allowed on set if you hadn't passed that course.
I think working with a crew who'd already experienced the shutdown, I think everyone really came on board and did us proud. They really abided by the protocols. A lot of people we spoke to going into it, they said, oh, the protocols say for a few days and then it also gets a bit relaxed. But it just was we were really strong about it, really clear. There were workable protocols as well, and everyone abided by them, and we miraculously got through.
Well, I mean,
You get used to it, don't you? You get used to, like what Roxanne was saying, that we made sure that everyone was wearing masks at all times, even when we were outdoors, even when we could distance from each other in a big open space. We still said you have to wear your mask, because otherwise it'll lead to easing of the rules, and it leads to too relaxed.
Yeah. So, I mean, I take my hat off to you for achieving what you've achieved. It's no mean feat by any stretch of the imagination. Just to benefit us all, what perhaps were you, having been through what you've been through, what have been your main sort of findings? You know, the main challenges that you were surprised by, perhaps, having been through what you've been through, in terms of how the cast reacted, maybe Reggie himself, or the technical aspects, anything.
I mean, I wonder if we were helped because we'd been working together before, so it wasn't us coming together for the first time, and I don't know what it would be like to come together for the first time. But I think communication clearly of what the protocols are before people get on set, so that people have an idea of what they're stepping into, and that we are taking it seriously and taking their health and safety seriously is a big learning. Because I think the thing about COVID, like, you're used to as a producer dealing with health and safety on set, we all are. But what is unusual about COVID is you are potentially at risk of putting other people's families in danger, you know, if you don't get it right, because you don't know where they're living or what their circumstances are. So for me, it was just quite how serious that is, and that communication is absolutely key.
Yeah, what Kate says, right. And then there were some, because there were all sorts of Zoom things going on. You can imagine for pre-production, the production team, and it was like constant Zooms as well as trying to do the job, which is interesting. But there were, you know, the production team was setting up COVID specific pre-production meetings as well, where it was just to talk about that stuff, because the HODs were already across it. But just to hammer that home with them with the communication, the production team really doubled down on that.
But he gave us some advice going into it. I mean, that was also brilliant, is I think a lot of the production community all spoke to each other and helped each other. And we spoke to a producer who'd done a week's sort of pickups on a show, and he said, you can't run a sterile set. You can't run a sort of, you're not setting up a sort of medical sterile area. You know, you've just got to do the best you can, and also make it still a working environment, make it still a nice place for people to work. And, you know, so we did have protocols and we were very strict about them, but we also had a night, you know, you've got to make people want to get out of bed and come to work in these conditions. So, you know, it was just useful to sort of realize we could do everything we can, but we can't eliminate, we couldn't stop the virus, we could just do what we could.
I think the other final sort of thing as well is communicating really clearly with our financiers, because the budget went up by a third, I would say, as a result of COVID. And we just had to be straight with our financiers and say, we want to finish this and we want you to want to finish it with us. But in order to be safe, the cost is going to go up, and we all need to come on board, because we're not going to do it without being safe. And I think you have to be straight with anybody about that. It will cost more to shoot in COVID. It just will.
Part of the increase, though, is also we had to do a whole 4 weeks prep again. I mean, and that does cost a lot of money. So, you know, I don't know what it would be, the percentage rise if you were just starting now. But we did 4 weeks prep throughout August, all of it remote. So yeah.
Obviously, you were helped to a degree by a large chunk of the filming being outdoors, which I suppose helped with the conditions you were working under. But can you talk a bit more about your indoors filming, your interior filming, how that panned out in the end for you and the cost that came with that?
Well, just very quickly, I'll just kick it off. We were supposed to be filming on locations, but the locations were too small to safely shoot in COVID. So we hired a studio and did a studio build in a massive space in Excel. And that felt safer and more controlled. And as Roxy says, areas were marked out in the building with different coloured tape to allow people to, you know, be in them or not be in them. In fact, it was because it was such a big space, it felt very safe there.
Yeah. But the important point being you had to go to a studio rather than a location, interior location. So that was a big learning there, wasn't there?
We were kind of lucky in that sense that we only had a few of those interior locations left, and the rest was mainly outdoors. So if you're shooting an entire film in a house, that might be a different scenario.
Very good point. And last one of all, creatively, just to ask the question, this is Reggie's film. Do you feel that he was hampered perhaps by the new conditions for the second half of the shoot, or did it result in some better creativity or more creativity?
Go on, Kate.
I don't think he was hampered. Weirdly, Reggie's extraordinary because he tries to make everything into a positive situation. He kept in contact with the actors the whole time. He got the privilege, which most first-time directors don't get, of cutting half of his film, seeing what it looked like. So he cut all the existing rushes that he'd shot. So he knew what he'd got. He knew how it looked. He knew what the performances were like. So that when he came back to set, he sort of had that learning. It's almost like he wasn't a first-time director, first-time feature director anymore. And that was bizarrely a sort of extraordinary privilege, which you wouldn't normally get. So, and we saw a cut of the film yesterday, and it's seamless. You wouldn't be able to tell, I don't think, if you were watching it, which bits we shot pre-COVID and which bits we shot post. At least I'm confident that's the case, and I hope audiences will feel that. I think he used it to his advantage.
Fantastic. Well, that's a testament to your production and your creativity, so well done, guys. I'll hand you back to Emma, if I may.
Thank you, John. So, lots of questions. First one, I guess, is Roxy. How did you and the medic work together? As in, did you lean on them for more up-to-date advice, or did you have a very kind of clear separate paths?
So we sort of worked together at the beginning of each shoot day, because he was the one administering the temperature checks. That was kind of his job at the start of the day, and then he was a medic otherwise, the normal medic on set. So I mean, it was a continued kind of discussion, I guess. I mean, I did actually, more in pre-production than on the shoot, to be honest. I talked to not the medic who was on set himself, but the company who provided the medic. I had some conversations with them, because they had some of the most up-to-date kind of knowledge about how temperature testing and other things was being done on some of the sort of high-end TV stuff that was already happening before our shoot, that they were also on. So I had some quite long, in-depth conversations about that and the best way to set up things to do with the temperature tents and testing tents and that kind of thing, if we were to have testing on set, which we ended up doing for part of it. So yeah, it was more in pre-production. We had a bit of consultation on that about best practice, and then after that, it was the beginning of the day, and that was kind of it really. We sort of had our separate jobs.
Thank you. Jeroen, possibly for you or Polly and Kate, there was a question about, did you have more sort of standby scenes? Did you have actors on standby in anticipation of people having to self-isolate? You know, old-fashioned wet weather gear, but taken to a new level, I guess.
No, we didn't. We tried to schedule everything as best we could, and give everything enough time, but we didn't. We sort of took it on board that if anything was to happen, we would have to delay that scene with that actor. It was just, that's the way it was. I believe we had to recast someone because that person was unavailable because of the restart, but otherwise we were just trying to schedule.
There was a question, and I know you temperature tested your cast and crew. Did you COVID test them, as in the swabs? And if so, what costs were involved ish?
I guess I'll start with the sort of the actual doing it. Yes, we did. So I mentioned the close contact cohort, which were constantly tested during, there were sort of certain sort of amounts of time in pre-production. So sort of 2 weeks before, however many, 3-4 days before, 2 days before, all of the, and it was kind of complicated because the cast with day players coming in at different times on the shoot, sort of going backwards, we had kind of a constant schedule ahead of time of them coming onto set, that they were being tested in advance. So that was a kind of an ongoing thing for the cast and the close contact cohort. And then we also tested the close contact cohort and other members of crew who weren't in that technically, but did kind of often for their work have to have more close contact with the cast, such as makeup and sound. We also added on some other crew members who would be tested during the shoot as well, once a week. And for that, apart from doing kind of at-home tests, which we did during prep, I organised a swabber to be on location at the same time as doing the temperature testing, to swab those particular cast and crew members at the certain point in the schedules that we'd organised it. So that was roughly what we did.
Anyone can answer this. Questions about how accommodation, you touched on day players there, but did you accommodate the cast in any way together to keep them safe? How was transport done?
What we asked is, we had our protocols and we asked that everyone observe the government guidelines outside of work as well. So please socially distance as much as you can, but we didn't require anyone to self-isolate. What we did do was have no travelling to set on London Underground, how you would normally function in London. We didn't do that, particularly in rush hour. So there were a lot more cars and people were brought to set, anyone was brought to set. It wasn't just actors. It was like making sure that people were avoiding contact with other people as much as possible before they got onto set, and asking people to observe just the general protocols that everyone else in life was having to observe outside of that. But we didn't put anyone up or put them in specific bubbles like that, no. And we were very lucky we didn't get a single positive test the whole time we were shooting.
That was one of the questions right at the end, so that's that one asked, so good work. Jeroen, I guess for you, people are interested in have you changed your way of working? As in, I guess how you would have prioritized things in a different way. And then another thing is, do people behave, generally speaking, obviously don't name names, but are most people, and that's you and Roxy, I guess, compliant, behave themselves, do what they're told when asked to change a pattern of working? Yeah,
so you do have to change your pattern of working a little bit. Like when you come on set, we would look at the space we have and where people can be, because that's like the main concern. If you're arriving on set with like 25-30 people to do your shoot day, you want to make sure that everyone can distance and that you've got enough space for everyone to be. So you immediately looking at like, where can everyone be? And then also, obviously, you keep reminding people to drink enough water, even if they're wearing masks. And sometimes then that mask stays down because people forget or for other reasons. But you just have to remind people, and generally they're compliant. Yeah, we had.
See, you agree?
No issues. You just get used to it,
Yeah, no, I'd agree with Jeroen. It was, everyone was really good, and as he says, I think it was more complacency than anything, if it, or forgetfulness, if there was an element of not putting a mask on
rather than willfulness, indeed.
Absolutely.
And as we've got Roxy, lots of people interested in what competence you feel you need to have as a COVID supervisor, what training you did. Roxy, perhaps you just talk about your background and what training you did to take on this role.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm like a short form producer. So and you tend to do everything in that in terms of production management, coordination, bit of everything kind of role in terms of producing. And I started just looking at the online resources just anyway, as a kind of looking ahead to what shoots I would be doing once things were going up and running again. So I started with the first option course that they'd started introducing for freelancers. And then screen skills, and also the APA questionnaire as well. So I kind of just did what was available at the time, more for my own kind of knowledge. And then obviously people started talking about COVID supervision being a role. And then obviously this all happened, and Pirates was looking for one, and we went through that process. But I would say, I do think it's important for the person doing it to have a production background, because it's about understanding what production is and what everyone is doing to bring everything as a whole, because it's difficult with people's roles. You can't get in the way of what they're doing. Film sets and shooting is hard enough and intense enough, and not enough time as it is. So your role has to kind of ingratiate itself without stopping people from doing their jobs. So that was kind of definitely what I assumed going in, but also part of the learning curve was as well. And if someone's not wearing a mask, but there's a, it's shooting, you can't just be shouting at people to say, get your mask back on when there's a take going, or there's a very extreme, tense bit of prep going, because time is limited, and you can't just be getting in there and stopping people from doing what they need to do in that limited time. So it's about having a bit of sort of sensibility about that, and kind of, if you have to say something, say it with a bit of understanding of what they're going through, and a bit of subtlety, and still get done what you need to be done. But you just have to do it with understanding of what everyone else is trying to do as part of their job. So I do think having a production background's, I'd probably say essential, because you have to understand what the different departments are doing and what their pressures are and what they need to do and when, and how they all link together. So I would say that's quite important.
The reason we interviewed a number of people, and Roxy's absolute strength was both the training that she'd done, but also that she understood what it was like to be on set. It felt really important for us, and some of the other people that we had interviewed had other skills, but weren't as strong with that, and it was vital, and it proved to be.
Mhm.
Right, and actually staying with Polly and Kate, maybe a couple of people have come through, or maybe Yaron as well, asking about certain departmental areas, like what were the changes for costume and makeup truck, how they operated, and also stunts and vis effects. How was that altered, if indeed you had those two accomplished during the shoot?
I don't think we had any stunts when we came back.
No.
Trying to remember. Costume and hair and makeup. Back in March, they were sharing a truck. We didn't have any dressing rooms. We just had a green room area for the cast. When we came back, we had a three-way for the cast. We had a separate makeup truck, separate costume truck. The makeup department were being tested along with the cast, because they were very close and interacting with the cast, but they still carried on wearing. They wore visors as well as masks, I think. They were sort of very good and very carefully monitored. Costume department, we had less sort of standbys on set. We just we had our regular Joe, who was Joe Brilliant, who was on standby, but we didn't have so many sort of day players coming in. I can't remember.
And also the costume, so that they would have their costumes cleaned every night, delivered to them in special containers into their dressing rooms in sort of cloth, cotton covers, and they would dress themselves. So again, they were distanced from the costume team. It was done all much more at kind of more than arm's length to keep them safe. And when there were some complications, which is costly, which is we had doubles sometimes for driving, and we couldn't use the same costume because of COVID. So we had to have two costumes, and some of those was very specific, and that was quite complicated and costly.
And we had a lot of scenes that happened inside a car. So whenever we were setting up inside a car, putting mics in and etc., before the cast would step in, we would fog it with like one of those COVID foggers before the cast would step in. We
were also doing very minimal checks. they weren't stepping on. They were looking at the app a lot, and then there were checks, but we weren't maybe doing quite so many checks.
Little curls weren't adjusted every take.
No.
And obviously continuity is still important. So you'd say to one of the actors like, "Hey, your collar, could you move it down or up the way it was," rather than someone stepping in and doing it for them.
Yeah, they were really, really good on that makeup and costume and sound, because obviously that relates to sound as well in terms of microphones and things like that. But and every now and then, again, like they got jobs to do, sometimes contact was necessary, but we kept it to absolute minimum. And the crew really good at, you know, making sure they were kind of visibly hand sanitizing and cleaning things before they're doing any of that, so the cast could also see it too. They could kind of maintain that sense of safety too. So yeah, it was minimal, but they were really, really good when they did have to have contact.
Brilliant. One last thing, and then I want to whip round and ask you all if there's one thing you would keep moving forward. John did a what have you learned, but I'd love to know if there's anything that you'd keep. I know what lots of people have been saying, except producers, writers and directors. But question has come, a couple of questions about post, both finishing post, which I know you're in now, and editing protocols, if things have changed for the editor or for the post team.
We're doing our post at a post house at Molinaire, and they have their own set of guidelines which our editor and director have to adhere to. Polly and I would normally drop into the edit, say hello, see how they're getting on. We've not been in at all because it's not safe for us to go in. We had a screening the other day, and where normally we would see a first cut of the film by all just sort of bundling into the edit and watching it on a screen, we had to book a screening room and work out how many people it could seat at a safe distance. And then, so we all went and watched the film then, and then rather than meet afterwards and talk about the film, we've got a Zoom call on Friday to then discuss what we've seen. So there's social distancing within post.
And I know John has just finished as well. He's just wrapped on a television series. John, was that your experience as well? Those pesky producers weren't in the room with you watching viewing?
It's an absolute joy, actually.
Yes, I know. I thought you might. Speaking as a pesky producer myself, obviously.
No, not at all. And we had to do exactly what you guys did. So we did upload a link so they could watch the film anyway, and then give notes, usually in a FaceTime call or what have you. And that was very productive and very useful. It's not the same thing in the same room together and what have you, but it worked well, and we were efficient about, you know, making changes and adding notes and so on.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So last question to each of you. Is there one thing that you think, actually, you know what, even when hopefully we're all over this, it's the industry has learned something that's useful for the future? I know, whoever wants to go first.
For sure.
Me, I really liked the app that gave us all the rushes live and the lack of video village. I think it allowed everyone to really focus on what was in front of them. And I found it as a producer, just really, I could put my headphones on, I could sit completely separate and really focus on what was happening rather than lots of people crowding around monitors. Because inevitably when that happens, you just all end up having a bit of a chat, and sometimes you just lose a bit of focus. I really like that.
Are you happy to say what app? I mean, Frame.io, or?
I think it was Frame.io, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I used it a year or so ago, and it is flipping amazing.
VUER, viewer.
Yeah, viewer. We get
okay.
Frame.io,
which is great. I'd like to keep that as well, along with the catering app that we used, which was for a specific catering company called Season 1.
Okay, interesting, brilliant.
I don't know why more people don't do this, because you could easily select in the morning what you want for breakfast and lunch, and then pick it up at the time that lunch was called in a box from their station.
Okay, portion control as well, fantastic.
It's great. Like that should definitely be a part of every shoot now.
Roxy?
I'm not lying, I'm struggling to think for this. If the producers want to jump in, I'll have a think.
I mean, I'm glad to say the app and the catering app.
Yeah, catering, definitely.
I mean, one other thing I've heard on other sessions, and it's interesting, is planning, is that ability for the production team to not have that moment in the morning when the director, producer and whoever else has slept on it and had a brilliant idea. And that's come through a few times. Roxy, maybe that's your one, I don't know.
I guess so, although I will say that part of my role on set that was an element of having sort of bespoke management when something came up, so which was generally between Yaron and I. If there was something going on, he would come up and go, right, okay, this might have COVID, does have COVID implications. How do you suggest that we do this? We can have a quick chat. I think something to do with sometimes people being in a car and the costume situation. I think we ended up putting one of the cast members in the back of the car when it would ordinarily have been a double, but the costume wasn't ready. But we were able to do it in a COVID safe way just by communicating about it on set and making a decision. And then them referring to me, go, look, is the COVID supervisor happy with this? And me going, yes, okay, let's do it like this and manage it in this way. There is an element of having to be a bit bespoke sometimes if something comes up. But it's already within the context, everything has already been put in place, and all of the crew and cast understanding what's expected of them anyway. So actually it's quite easy to do as long as you have that communication at the time.
Thank you everyone for coming. Your questions were fantastic, and to the panel, incredibly grateful. Thank you so much, and John and Teresa too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.